is writing his doctoral thesis with Tim Crane. He's at the University of Cambridge. He's also a lecturer at the University of Lincoln and a visiting lecturer at the University of Buckingham. He's a fellow of the Dalai Lama Centre for Compassion, Oxford. He's also the founding member of the Humane Philosophy Project, and he's a member of the Science, Religion and Philosophy, Science, Theology and Philosophy grant taking place at the University of Oxford at the Ramsey Centre. So if you're wondering where all these logos came from, Ralph is mainly responsible. So please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Thanks very much for the introduction, and to everyone for coming and for putting up with me putting myself in my own conference schedule. I mean, not only my own. This conference was really Tamash's brainchild, but both of us organised it. So I'm going to talk about what I call the phenomenal argument for mental substance. Here's a summary of the whole talk. Point one: traditional alternatives to physicalism are substance dualism and idealism. Substance dualism and idealism are unpopular. They've been usurped by property dualism and Pan-psychism. I'll say a bit more about the difference between these, obviously. And property dualism and Pan-psychism are quite popular. How popular, no one knows, because we don't have much in the way of empirical work, but they're clearly quite popular. However, the normal commitments of property dualists and Pan-psychists actually lead to substance dualism or idealism. So now I'm going to say all that a bit more slowly and with more detail. And who's that? Does anyone know? That's right. This is, very good. That is indeed Christian Wolff, who appears to be the source of an idea that sort of floats around sometimes on undergraduate mind courses and things, that the three main views, at least at one time, were substance dualism, materialism, or idealism. So Christian Wolff seems to have originated that idea. His paradigm example of an idealist was Leibniz rather than Berkeley. In effect, what I'm doing in this talk is arguing for the reinstatement of the Wolffian paradigm as representing the viable positions in the metaphysics of mind. So some definitions. Property dualism and substance dualism both say that there are non-physical mental things in addition to physical things. Property dualism says that the non-physical mental things include only non-physical properties. It's associated with Jackson, Chalmers, Kim, and many others, and it's quite popular. Substance dualism says that the non-physical mental things include non-physical substances. They usually say properties as well, but they include substances. It's associated with Plato, Augustine, and Descartes, as well as with some people in this room, but it is nonetheless fairly unpopular. You'll see, that's my picture of a soul. Someone pointed out to me it looks a bit like the golden snitch from Quidditch, although, like Brandon's picture of a soul, it's blue. Actually, I liked Brandon's picture better because it looked like a Japanese hitodama. Do you know about these? They're these sort of blue flames that you see emitted from someone's body after they die in Japan, and they're sort of associated with the soul. There's a lovely 8th century Japanese poem that says, if you were alone and met with the complete blueness of a hitodama, you would naturally think of it as sorrow on a rainy night. Isn't that just lovely? But anyway, so the soul is probably blue. Now, what's the difference between... what a weird order. What's the difference between properties and substances? Well, I like to approach this question on the basis of the following principle. If you're a substance dualist in the sense that Descartes was, then you're a substance dualist. I also like the similar principle, if you're an idealist in the sense that Berkeley was, then you're an idealist. So I think it's relevant to this debate. But in fact, the reason why people invented property dualism, if you look at the text, was so that they could claim not to be Cartesians, right? In Kim and in Chalmers and so forth. So I think we should assume that substance here means what it did for Descartes, which, as Tim Crane said in his talk, is something that can exist on its own. A substance is something that can exist on its own, or equivalently, a substance is something whose existence does not necessitate the existence of anything else. By contrast, a property is going to be something that at the very least does necessitate the existence of something else. And I think this is a really plausible claim about properties. I don't think property dualists are in trouble yet. As D.C. Williams points out, properties seem to be characterized with a special form of incompleteness, which you can capture by saying a property couldn't exist on its own without the rest of the thing that it belongs to. And I don't mean to say that it needs some kind of substratum or something like that. I actually think that's at best uninteresting and almost certainly false. I think, but you don't need to go that far. Properties need other properties of the things they belong to. So, for example, you can't have the shape of the lectern without any size or material constitution. You can't have the pitch of a note without a timbre or a volume. And I think there's a good illustration of this idea that D.C. Williams uses. When Alice meets the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, the cat is grinning, so it's pretty weird to begin with. But then the cat disappears, all apart from its grin. And Alice says, "Gosh, that's terribly strange. I've many times seen a cat without a grin, but never a grin without a cat." Now that's funny, in part because we all know that a grin couldn't remain if actually the rest of the cat disappears. It doesn't make sense, because the grin is a property of the cat. Disney get this wrong, because they have the cat's teeth and its lips remain. I don't think that's what's meant to happen. Okay, so substances are independent, properties aren't. There are a few philosophical worries there, like, hang on, could a substance exist on its own without any properties? I think when we say it could exist without anything else, we mean without anything over and above it, and its properties are not something over and above it. We don't mean without anything identical to it, whereas, for example, the pitch of a note couldn't exist without the timbre or the volume, even though the timbre and volume are something over and above it. Yeah, it's a little bit complex, but not very. Traditional substance dualists have the mental substances be souls or selves, typically persisting selves, continuants. I don't think you have to think that to be a substance dualist as I've defined it. You could formulate a Humane or Buddhist substance dualism, according to which the non-physical substances are like subjectless perceptions. That's Damcho Gyaltsen. He's the abbot of the School of Dialectic in Dharamsala. And I had a chat with him about this, and he seemed to endorse a view of something like that kind. That's Hume, and he seems, I mean, you can interpret Hume as endorsing a view of this kind if you want to. He says perceptions may exist separately and have no need of anything else to support their existence. They are therefore substances, as far as this definition explains a substance. Whether he also believes in bodies, it gets a bit complex and fairly boring. There's kind of a look that you have to have these opinions. It's kind of interesting. Okay, and Kim says substance dualism has not been taken as a serious position in mainstream philosophy of mind since the early 20th century. That's a massive exaggeration, but we all know what he means there. Like those of us who know that that's false also know that when we take substance dualism seriously, people treat us with a bit of an incredulous stare and so forth. He's capturing something there. And yet, property dualism is fairly popular. Well, why is property dualism popular? I mean, as a matter of sociology, I think maybe the zombies argument has had the most effect. 23.3% of philosophers, according to a survey conducted by the most influential proponents of the zombies argument by Chalmers, according to that survey, 23.3% of philosophers endorse the conceivability and metaphysical possibility of philosophical zombies. That's a lot, right, if it's that many. I'm going to treat the zombies argument as the reason for accepting property dualism, or, as we'll see in a moment, Pan-psychism, for the next few slides, and then later I'll say what I think you should think if you prefer the knowledge argument or the transparency argument. So conceivability argument says the physical facts don't a priori entail consciousness. If the physical facts don't a priori entail consciousness, then they don't necessitate it. Therefore, the physical facts don't necessitate consciousness, which seems to mean that, well, conscious experiences don't supervene on the physical facts. They seem to be something over and above them. Premise one, most people agree with, most physicalists do, there are exceptions, but as Galen Strawson says, they're mad. Premise two requires much more defense. Why should it be the case that the absence of a priori entailment means the absence of necessitation? Well, the standard way of defending premise two, I mean, again, it gets quite complex, is to say that, roughly speaking, we grasp conscious states in a way that precludes Kripke-style a posteriori necessities, and there aren't any other a posteriori necessities. There aren't any strong necessities as they're known. Now, what does that mean? Well, the rough idea is this. The reason why I can't tell a priori, if I'm an ancient Greek, that Hesperus is phosphorus, is because my concept of Hesperus does not reveal the essential nature of Hesperus. It only reveals this rather superficial property of being the first celestial body to appear in the night sky in the evening. And my concept of phosphorus likewise only reveals this rather superficial property that it has, but that isn't necessary or sufficient for being that thing. By contrast, quite plausibly, our grasp of phenomenal properties actually reveals something like their essential nature. And I don't think I could put this any better than Michelle put it in her talk. I mean, that's the more recent way of putting this, and it was developed largely by Philip Goff and by Martine. Martine? She's gone. She's back. Welcome, Martine. I was just citing you.
Oh, good.
Developed mainly by Philip Goff and by Martine. David Chalmers has a slightly more complicated, but I think similar and equally persuasive way of defending this claim concerning two-dimensional semantics, but I won't go into that now. So there you go, that's the idea. We grasp the phenomenal states, the conscious states, in such a way as to rule out a Kripke-style a posteriori necessity, where the physical facts necessitate the conscious experiences merely because we haven't understood what the conscious experiences essentially are. And there aren't any other kinds of a posteriori necessities. There aren't brute necessities which are simply inexplicable. Okay? Now, that gets you to dualism. I've called it an argument for property dualism. You notice, with this argument and most other arguments for property dualism, the assumption that the conscious or phenomenal things we're talking about are properties is just an unargued assumption. It's never part of the argument. Nothing about the argument tells you that you're going to get non-physical properties rather than non-physical substances. And this is the same in Jackson, in Chalmers, in Kim. It just enters, and then later they say, and I don't want non-physical substances because Descartes is evil. Or similar. But it's usually put forward as an argument for property dualism, or, as has long been recognised, as an argument for the alternative view, Pan-psychism. How does this happen? Well, it's pointed out that we probably don't grasp, or plausibly don't grasp, the deep nature of physical properties in the way we do phenomenal properties, because if by physical properties we mean the ones described by physics, well, these seem to be purely structural and relational properties, or mathematico-nomical properties, as I think what it says, which need some kind of categorical characteristics to underlie them. And if that's the case, it might turn out that the physical facts, the actual physical facts, do a posteriori necessitate the phenomenal facts because of their own deep phenomenal nature, right? Not because we misunderstood what the nature of conscious states is, but because we haven't thoroughly understood what the nature of physical things is. And so, if you recognize that we don't have the same kind of grounds for thinking that we grasp the deep nature of physical things as we have in the case of conscious states, then you have to treat the zombies argument as an argument for the disjunction of property dualism, or this view that physical things have a deep phenomenal, or perhaps, as some people say, proto-phenomenal nature. And standardly, people think that if physical things have a deep phenomenal nature, then you're going to have to be a pan-psychist. It can't just be the physical things that make you up. It's got to be the other ones too, because they seem to be similar looking at them from the outside. There's a Galen Strawson quotation motivating part of this view, but I won't bother reading it out. There's a question of, I mean, Pan-psychism, it looks like that. But how do we categorize it? This is a question which I think hasn't been decided with anything like a consensus in the literature. Galen Strawson calls it a kind of materialism. But I think it's usually actually presented as a form of what is rightly described as both neutral monism. That's an ugly adjectival use of both there, and not the normal. Is it usually an adjective? I have no idea. I suppose not. But that's an ugly adjectival use. What's it doing there? Well, traditional neutral monism said that the stuff everything's made out of, or the stuff that exists, has neither mental nor physical being, ultimately. It's ultimately neither mental nor physical, like Russell's pan-qualityism. That's not what you get with contemporary pan-psychism. What you typically get with contemporary pan-psychism is the idea that this stuff is both mental or experiential and, if not physical, then at least non-mental and non-experiential. It has two aspects. So that's, I guess, why Hedda described this as a dual aspect pan-psychism. Now, the non-experiential aspect could be a few different things. It could be traditional primary qualities like extension and solidity. It could be spatial relations, which might be understood in a more mysterious, noumenal way. Or it could be an even more mysterious plus portion of some consciousness plus reality. This is what Philip Goff thinks, of which conscious states are a mere aspect. But most panpsychists think there is this non-experiential part as well, and it usually plays an important role in their responses to the combination problem. So, for example, Hedda suggested in the discussion earlier that the way that the micro-subjects fuse into a macro-subject has to do with them being spatially close to each other, their spatial relations to each other. Now, you might think that, well, so it sounds there like spatial relations are playing an important role. And this is certainly true of Philip Goff. I think it's probably true of Strawson too. So here's the question, and things will speed up a bit here, because I know I've used 3/4 of my time. This both style of neutral monism is arguably just as property dualist as property dualism. Now, I'm not going to go into the details there, but if you're going to have primary qualities, spatial relations, or whatever, that aren't construed as being merely nothing over and above the phenomenal states, then it looks property dualist. Now, details aside, that makes me think that both this view and property dualism face this question. Does it make sense to say that conscious states stand in the same dependence relation to physical properties as shape does to size, or pitch to timbre, and so forth? I think the intuitive answer is no. It doesn't make sense. They do not stand in the same conceptual relation, at least. And if we grasp the nature of these things, that suggests they don't stand in the same metaphysical relation. But I think you can do better than the mere intuition. You can have an argument for this view, which relies more or less only on the presuppositions of the zombies argument. You say, one, the phenomenal facts don't a priori entail the existence of physical things. I think most people in this literature agree with that. Many have done so explicitly, Goff, Chalmers certainly. Two, if the phenomenal facts don't a priori entail the existence of physical things, then they don't necessitate the existence of physical things. Therefore, the phenomenal facts don't necessitate the existence of physical things. Well, that means you have at least one phenomenal thing, right, not including anything physical, that has independent existence, doesn't necessitate the existence of anything further. So you've got at least one non-physical substance in the Cartesian sense of substance. And if you also think that your own conscious states don't a priori entail the existence of other non-physical things, like your friend's conscious states, then it's going to turn out that the conscious subject you are is a non-physical substance in the Cartesian sense. It's a pretty plausible addition. Premise 2 can be defended on exactly the same grounds as it was in the zombies argument. Basically, we grasp conscious states in a way that precludes Kripke-style a posteriori necessities, and there aren't any other a posteriori necessities. And since the arguments are exactly homologous, it seems to me that anyone motivated by the zombies argument to accept property dualism or panpsychism has to accept this argument for the disjunction of substance dualism or idealism. I'll say a bit more about why it has that consequence in a moment. Here are two classic objections to the argument from disembodiment. You might have recognized this is kind of an argument from disembodiment, right? saying you can imagine the phenomenal facts without any physical things, and therefore in a disembodied state. Well, people would say of Descartes' argument for disembodiment that it doesn't work because the pronoun I does not reveal the nature of its referent in such a way as to preclude Kripke-style a posteriori necessities. That's false, as I think Professor Swinburne's going to demonstrate to us later. But I don't need to rely on that claim because the argument I've given does not use the pronoun I. It replaces pronouns with purely descriptive phenomenal terms. A second objection that's frequently given, this is often given to Kripke's version of the disembodiment argument, is that it fails because it depends on illicit assumptions about identities in counterfactual scenarios. The idea is that, oh yeah, this might show that a world with phenomenal experiences like ours could exist without anything physical, or with a subject with states like yours could, but it doesn't show that you could. Well, I think that's absolutely confused for a number of reasons. But the simplest response to make is that if you think it doesn't work for that reason, then you have to say the same about the zombies argument, right? You're going to have to say, well, all the zombies argument shows is that physical things very like the ones we have could exist without conscious states. But you haven't shown that the physical things we have could do so, and so you haven't shown the conscious states we have are nothing over and above those physical things. In fact, you've undermined the very conclusion you need, which is the physical things we actually have necessitate the conscious states we actually have. It seems to me. Okay, so what are the consequences? Well, if you endorse the conceivability argument as grounds for property dualism, you have to endorse substance dualism. If you endorse the conceivability argument for pan-psychism, you have to endorse idealism, possibly bringing back a combination problem. And just to clarify that second part, the thought here is that you can't have primary qualities, spatial relations, or the plus part of consciousness plus, as Philip Goff wants, unless either one, they're nothing over and above the things a priori entailed by conscious states, right? If your spatial relations are nothing over and above our experiences as we conceive them, that's fine, but Berkeley has that, and Leibniz have that, and if you're an idealist in the way Berkeley is, you're an idealist. Or otherwise, you're going to need to posit something further in virtue of which things stand in spatial relations or have primary qualities or whatever that isn't necessitated by the conscious states. Well, then you've moved to substance dualism. There is a Husserlian alternative, I think. The only alternative I can think of that's logically available is to posit some non-experiential thing or things that the phenomenal facts do a priori entail. It's not going to be physical things as normally conceived. And then try to use that to work back to property dualism or pan-psychism. I think the only plausible subject and the plausible candidate, and the only prominent one historically, would be something like a transcendental subject, as Husserl describes, right? A subject that must exist given that there's experience, but that is nonetheless something over and above the experiences it has. I don't want to exclude that possibility. I think it's quite interesting. I don't see how it's going to do much work getting us back to property dualism or pan-psychism. It seems to take us, if anything, further away. But moreover, many proponents of the positions I'm criticising, including definitely Strawson and Goff, and I think implicitly Chalmers, side with Sartre against Husserl in denying the existence of transcendental subjects of any kind. Right? Goff and Strawson are completely explicit about this. The subject is nothing over and above its conscious states. Okay, penultimate slide. Well, okay, it's completely clear and now uncontroversial that if you endorse the conceivability argument for property dualism or panpsychism, you've got to be a substance dualist or an idealist. What if you actually only endorse the transparency argument or the knowledge argument for property dualism or panpsychism, and you reject the zombies argument? You have to actually reject the soundness of the zombies argument. You can't just think it's less important. Well, in that case, it seems to me you're not going to be what you're going to be able to do roughly is posit some strong necessities which undermine the substancehood of non-physical things. You're going to be able to posit some strong necessities in virtue of which the non-physical things do depend on physical things or on the physical aspect of consciousness plus or whatever for their existence. But I don't think this is going to do any more than restore the letter of property dualism or neutral monist panpsychism. I don't think it's going to restore the spirit. Because what you get there seems to me to just be a substance dualist picture, right, with some strong necessities drawn onto it. You're not getting the metaphysical relation between pitch and timbre or shape and size. You're getting a Cartesian soul and some plus part of consciousness plus or some body or whatever, and you're just getting some sort of strong necessity arrows drawn in between them. So the conclusion, it seems to me that because the opposition tends to come from physicalism, present-day anti-physicalists don't notice that their compromised positions are internally incoherent. And since there was no good reason, I'm not going to argue this, I'm just going to say it, there was no good reason to eschew non-physical substances in the first place, whilst accepting non-physical properties, I think opponents of physicalism should just endorse substance dualism or idealism. And therefore, dualism in the 21st century should be just the same as dualism in the 17th century, or indeed, in my opinion, the 13th, the 4th, or the 4th BC. And I'd like to just conclude by adding one advantage of this picture, as I see it, is that it ties up the very sophisticated analytical metaphysics we're doing now with the extremely general intuitions, earlier philosophical views and so forth that appear to us to endorse some kind of mental or non-physical substance. Michel mentioned that that's somewhat controversial, but look, that's all of human culture there. And as you can see, every one of these cultures does endorse substance dualism. That's a hitodama, by the way. Okay, that's all.